Okay, we'll be starting momentarily. Okay. Okay, just switching to the right Wi-Fi. It's very complicated. Okay. Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We thank you all for coming in, braving the weather and the elements, the precipitation. Hopefully it won't rain again. My wife sent me a text that said for the next 120 minutes, it's not supposed to rain. So if she's wrong, blame her. And I guess that just means I can't go more than 120 minutes. That's all that means. Not a problem. Okay. So the inspiration, just put up the source sheet on the Zoom, number of people joining us on the Zoom, thank you. And everyone here in the audience. The source sheet's on the shulchan here if anyone else needs. The inspiration for tonight's shir, oftentimes I've been giving 5-part series monthly for the last number of years. I took over that role. Rabbi Davis used to give a monthly series, one shir a month. And oftentimes when I'm preparing for Shavuos is when these ideas come to me, because I like to give shiurim on Shavuot topics that interest me. And I start thinking about a topic that interests me. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll save that. That sounds like a good series. Maybe I'll hold on to that one. So this is something that came up Shavuot 3-4 years ago. You know, women that are mentioned in the Talmud. And I wasn't sure what I was gonna do with it. I had a list of 3 or 4. Like I gotta think of who my 5th one is. I finally figured it out. And then I put it on the side. And then just recently I came across a book review for a book called The Women of Rothschild. I've not read the book yet. So if it's bad, it's not an endorsement, but it was a fascinating book review about the women of the Rothschild family. Of course, we know the Rothschild family. Specifically, it's the British leg of the Rothschild family, and this was part of the review. And it was after reading this that I said I want to do this series on women of the Talmud, because this is what it said. It said, as Jews in a Christian society and women in a deeply patriarchal family, these women of Rothschilds were outsiders, excluded from the family bank. They forged their own distinct dynasty of daughters and nieces, mothers and aunts, misfits and conformists, conservatives and idealists, performers and introverts. They mixed with everyone across the spectrum of society in Great Britain. And Rothschild women helped bring down ghetto walls in the early 19th century in Germany. inspired some of the most remarkable cultural movements of the Victorian period in the mid-20th century, burst into America. The women of Rothschild give voice to the complicated, privileged, and gifted women whose vision and tenacity shaped history. I'm like, that sounds like an interesting book. If anyone reads it, let me know. I think I might get to it, hopefully. They don't have it in the library yet. When they do, I'll get to it. But in a lot of ways that describes the women of Rothschild is what I thought about these women that are highlighted, remarkable women highlighted in the Talmud. And the first one we're going to talk about is Bruria, perhaps one of the more famous of the five that we're going to focus in the course of this series. And what we're going to see is that it's a very interesting picture. The Talmud, through Mishnayot, through Medrash, through Gemara, paints a fascinating picture of this woman. Some suggest it's a composite of three women. As we'll see, she's identified in three different ways: by her name, by her father, and by her husband. And so some suggest it's really three different women that are a composite. But we're going to assume that it's one woman who fits the bill in all three of these categories. And what we'll see in the sources as we go through them is we're going to see a fascinating composite, which makes it more real, right? Because life is complicated and people are complicated. And when you have a composite of a complex picture, it makes it more real. So the picture that we have of Bruria, of who she was and what she is, and what her legacy is. Because if you make it into the Talmud, if you make it into the Mishnah, you have a legacy. And what is that? What is the legacy of Bruria? And as we go through the sources, I think you'll find, I hope you find it as interesting as I found it putting this together. Some of this information I knew. My wife went to a school for high school named after Bruria. So I knew some of this information. Some of this information I didn't know. Certainly the end that we're going to talk about, they don't talk about in the Bat Mitzvah class, was new to me and adds a layer of complexity to the story of Bruria and what it is exactly we're supposed to learn from it. So we're going to move a little bit because we want to go through it all. And I give it to you mostly in English sources, some in Hebrew, some both actually, a couple at the end that are just in Hebrew because I didn't have time to translate them in advance. Most of this is provided by Sefaria. So what do we know about who Bruria was? Well, we know from the Gemara in Psachim, page 62b, that according to the Gemara, as I underline and highlight in source number 1, Bruria was the wife of Rabbi Meir and the daughter of Rabbi Hanania or Chanina ben Teraja. Right, so these are two pieces of information that'll help us as we try to build an understanding of who Bruria was. We're going to come back to both of those, especially the Rabbi Chanina ben Teraja piece in a little bit. What does the Gemara in Psachim tell us? The Gemara in Psachim tells us that Bruria was exceedingly bright. She had a tremendous recall. She had a tremendous ability to learn something quickly in a way that was almost unprecedented. No woman, no man could really stand up to it. So here's the story. For instance, the Gemara in Psachim, Rabbi Simlai said to Rabbi Yochanan, teach me a certain book called the Book of Genealogies. And I'll give you 3 months. I'm on vacation for 3 months. I have a mini sabbatical. Teach me the entire book of genealogies. Rabbi Yochanan took a clod of earth and threw it at him. Not so ceremonious, not so important for the story, but you get the idea, right? I don't have to explain what he thought about that idea, right? It's not a good idea. So he actively showed that by throwing dirt at him. But then he said as follows: Bruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir and the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Teraja, sharp, had a good memory. She was able to learn 300 halachot in one day from 300 sages. So what do we know about Bruria? She was in the thick of things, right? She was in the mid, like you can't be out in the middle of nowhere and have the opportunity to be exposed to 300 halachot from 300 sages. So Bruria, perhaps that's why the Talmud prefaces this statement by telling us why she had the access. Meir, the great Rabbi Meir, major student of Rabbi Akiva, Chaim and Trajan, right? So she was in the thick of things, and not only was she have access, was she exposed to them, but she was holding, as you might say in Gemara language, right? She understood what was going on. She was able to absorb a tremendous amount of information, and still, right? She did not. It took her more than 3 years to learn this book, Sefer Yochsef, right? Because it is so long and difficult. So you think you can learn it in 3 months, right? So what's the assumption? If Bruria can't do it in 3 years, Rabbi Simlai, with all due respect, right, which is one of the most disrespectful things we say to people, right? With all due respect, you're not going to be able to handle it, right? But Bruria was able to handle it. She's sort of the benchmark. So it's not supposed to rain. I guess I have more time. The benchmark, right? The model, right? Something almost the exaggeration of the model, right? That's not typical. Bruria is not typical. Bruria is not typical of anyone. If Bruria can't do it, no one can do it. That's how we are. That's how we are introduced. Again, the timing, the order of these sources is not chronological. So don't say that this is how we're introduced to her. But tonight, that's how we're being introduced to Bruria. That she was in the thick of Talmudic discussions. Her husband, her father, were both sages, both teachers, and she had a tremendous gift, a tremendous memory. And of course, we only memorize and we only learn things that excite us. So you have to assume that Bruria wasn't disinterested in the topic, right? You can't have a tremendous feat of knowledge, of memorization, of learning if you're not interested. So these are some of the things we can deduce from the Gemara Mesachim. And not only it seems there are 2 examples, the 2 Toseftas in Kalim, sources 2 and 3, that can be understood as an outgrowth of Bruria's tremendous ability to absorb information and to recall that information, right? Because as it relates to determining the halacha within the Mishnah or Tosefta, which is also a body of teachings from around the same time as the Mishnah, it's about being safeguards of a tradition, right? So Bruria seems to have been a safeguard of the tradition of an accurate depiction of that Masorah, right? So in source number 2, 1 Tosefta at the beginning of Kalim talks about whether a certain piece of a door is pure or impure. And Rabbi Tarfon said it was impure. The sages said it's pure, and Bruria said that one may remove it from this doorway and hang it on the neighbor's doorway. And when Rabbi Yeshua heard this, he immediately said Bruria is correct. Right? So whether this was a deduction or whether this was a tradition that she had, that Rabbi Yeshua, either way, Rabbi Yeshua gives his seal of approval to the tradition, to the statement of Bruria. And Bruria is interjecting herself among the rabbis. She was not afraid to say her piece because, again, she knew who she was. She knew how the system worked. She was obviously devoted to learning that information, and therefore she felt qualified to offer an opinion on the topic. Not only did she think she was qualified, Rabbi Yeshua also thought she was qualified. Right? Rabbi Yeshua says she's right. The next example is going to bring us back a little bit to give some color to her life, her family life, where she came from, some of the challenges. We all have challenges in our family life, and Bruria was no exception. It's a technical question about when is if you have an oven that becomes impure, at what point, if you smash it, it becomes pure again? How badly does it have to be smashed, right? That's the technical question, right? So he said, Rav Chalafta from Hanania said, I asked Shimon ben Hanania, who asked the son of Hanina ben Trajan. The son said, when they break it. But the daughter of Hanina ben Trajan said, when you cut it into sections. Right? So slightly difference of opinion. Here it's not between Bruria and the other sages. It's Bruria and her brother. Fascinating, right? So Bruria and her brother are having this disagreement. And when they went before Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said, one of the things that sons are very scared to hear, right? That the daughter said it better than the son. The daughter said it better than the son, and Bruria was right. And the son of Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan, who's not named, and in a minute we'll have a suggestion as to why he's not named, right? But Bruria is named, not here, by the way, just the daughter of Chanina ben Trajan. Later on, in a moment, we'll see again where Bruria is not named, even though she is referred to as the daughter of Chanina ben Trajan. But her explanation of the case, her explanation of the Masorah, of the halacha, of the tradition, is taken as being authoritative, as being more accurate than the brothers. Speaking about the brother, if you look at source 4 on page 1, the last source on that page, there's Smachot, which is part of the Masechtot Ketanot, the minor tractates found in Talmud Bavli. It tells a tragic tale of Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan's son. And presumably, it's the same son. We have no proof for sure that it is, but we have no proof that there are other children that were engaged and involved with one another in this way. So I think it's fair to make that assumption for these purposes. So here there's an incident, and we're told that the son of Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan, this I'm making up, right? He took it really hard, that he wasn't quite as skilled of a posek or given as much, halachic cred on the street as his sister. I don't know if that's the reason, but whatever the reason was, right? He went at the end of line 1, he went to an evil culture. He went off the derech. He started hanging out with a rough crowd, right? It was bad. It was really bad because he got himself into trouble. He got himself involved in people who were violent, and they ended up dead. Bandits killed him, right? Line 2 in that source number 4. He was found 3 days later. They finally put him together and had a funeral service for him. And then 3 different family members eulogized him, right? No children. This brother doesn't seem to have a family himself, family of origin. So his father eulogizes him from a pasuk in Mishlei. His mother eulogizes him. Lastly, his sister eulogizes him. Last line on page 1, bread of falsehood is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth shall be filled with gravel. Right? In other words, this was a warning, seemingly. It seems to have been a warning, a comment on the unfortunate end to her brother's life, right? Bread of falsehood is, you get tempted by all types of interesting, people and interesting opportunities and interesting, shiny things, and you end up going off the path, and afterwards your mouth shall be filled with gravel. That's when you're dead. So be careful. So being that the sister gets the last word, that itself seems to be meaningful. At the very least, what we see is a piece of her family life. Right? This is tragedy number 1. Her brother goes off the derech, hangs out with the bandits, ends up dead. She has to eulogize him, taking that role as the final word about his life. His life is not just sort of memorialized, but serves as a cautionary tale. And Bruria is the one that does so. Second story, again, when we first met Bruria, she was introduced in Psachim in source 1 as being both the wife of Rabbi Meir. We haven't really talked about that yet. We'll talk about that a little later. And the daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan. What do we know about Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan? We mentioned him in the Asara Harugei Malchut, 2nd century CE, during the Hadrianic persecutions. One of the one of the rabbis lived in the 2nd century CE that were soon after Rabbi Akiva, right? Who ultimately was martyred for his unwillingness to give up on teaching Torah. That's the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan. That's the story of basically all of the Harugei Malchut, those who were killed in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple. Pretty much between 70 when the temple's destroyed and Bar Kokhba revolt, 65 years later. That period of time saw a lot of effort on the part of the Romans to not just to wipe out Judaism through the persecution of religious leaders and religious authorities. So the tragedy of, whereas perhaps the tragedy of Berea's brother could be explained as, fostered on himself. We don't know the details, but there's no outside influence or force that caused that to happen. The case of her father is very different, right? Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan, the story is after he sees that Rabbi Akiva was martyred for teaching Torah, the Romans found him sitting and teaching Torah to multitudes with the Torah scroll rested on his chest, on his breast. So what did the Romans do? This is a famous image in the depiction of the surah of the 10 martyrs that are grouped together, even though those events didn't happen at the same time. They didn't even happen in the same year or decade, right? They happened over a period of time, but history is both linear and it's cyclical. And so that idea that they're all associated with the same moment, with the same piyut, with the same poem, same moment on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, by the way, is because the emotion that is meant to be evoked as a result of recalling their tragic end is all part of the same story. It's all part of the same story. So what's that story? So the Romans wrapped Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan in a Torah scroll, surround him with bundles of vines, sometimes it's called flax, right? So that it lit on fire. They put wet wool sponge on his heart so that he would not die quickly. It would exacerbate the pain. And his daughter, in parentheses, it says Berea because the Gemara doesn't say Berea there, although elsewhere in Avodah Zarah 18, it does talk about Berea specifically. But his daughter said, "Father, I see you like this." ? Exclamation point. Differences of opinion exactly what that means, but it seems to be similar to, in many other instances, the response of the colleagues or students that have to see the martyrdom of the great rabbis is the equivalent of zu Torah v'zu schara. How is that possible? How can a just God allow for such terrible tragedies to occur to people who are following his rules and his laws? Like that's sort of the question at hand, one that doesn't have a simple answer, one that God says at one point in the piyut we say on Yom Kippur, if you keep asking that, I'm going to turn the world back into its primordial tohu vohu. There's no good answer for that question. But the daughter asked the question, as we can imagine, at that poignant moment of tremendous grief, says, and Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan answers, Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan says, if I was burned alone, it would be hard for me. Now that the Torah scroll is being burned with me, the one who will avenge the offense of burning the Torah will also avenge the offense against me. Right? I understand this to be that because of the circumstances surrounding the execution, Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan was able to put himself into a larger context. It wasn't just one individual dying by himself, by herself. It was about being part of this chain, being part of the Jewish people, being part of Torah, being part of God's chosen people. And Chanina ben Trajan said that provided me with a degree of solace in this incredibly difficult moment. And then he says something, right? Then the students come in, say something that we might be familiar with because it's in the explanations in the piyut that Ashkenazim say on Yom Kippur, right? His student said to him, "Rebbe, what do you see?" And Chanina ben Trajan said that the parchment is burning, but the letters go up to heaven, right? So there's that continuity, right? And the proof is we're talking about him in 2021, right? So there's a very tangible and concrete fulfillment of what Rabbi Chanan ben Trajan said. We're talking about him today. So this is another tragedy that we learn about Beruria. Right, her brother dies, is murdered, her under dubious circumstances, seemingly because of his distance from the Torah. And then you have the story of Beruria's father, who's martyred, who's also murdered, executed because of his commitment to the Torah. Right. So either way you run it, you know, Beruria is faced with these difficulties and with these tragedies. So that's sort of the background. What we know that Beruria is tremendously, exceedingly bright and clever. And you know, when you're that smart, it's sometimes a gift and it's sometimes a liability. Right? Some people that are smarter than everyone else sometimes don't have as much patience, might we say, for us normal people who are not so smart, who are flawed, who may not do things exactly the way they should, who sometimes forget, right? We're not Beruria, we're not perfect. So how do you, when you are on that level, when you are, you know, unique, when you are Superwoman, when you're Superman, how do you relate to the regular lowly people? It's not easy. It's complicated. We get a very interesting mix. So on the one hand, we have this story in Brachot, page 10, which is Beruria having a sharp response to a heretic. So we feel right when Superwoman stands up against the nemesis, the archenemy, we feel good about that, right? We feel that she's protecting us. So that's the story here. Let's read it inside in the English. A certain heretic said to Beruria, it is written, Rani akara lo yalada. Sing, barren woman who has not given birth. Right? Mishum de lo yalada rani. Because the woman has not given birth, she's going to rejoice? It doesn't make any sense. Akara lo yalada, what does that mean? So Beruria says, Shatya, foolish one. Shvala Sefe Dikra, go to the end of the pasuk. Ki rabim b'nei shomema b'nei b'ulam ar Hashem. God says the children of the desolate shall be more numerous than the children of the married wife. What does that mean? Maya kara lo yalada, what does it mean? Because again, even the phrase itself is difficult to understand. Yeah, there has to be a deeper interpretation of a barren woman who has not had children. Right? It's a repeat of the same thing. What does it mean? A barren woman who has not had children. She's not had children. She's barren. It's a duplication of a phrase that needs to tell us something else. Beruria says, "I'll tell you what it means." That the akara here is referring to the Jewish people. Lo yalada means that Bnei Israel has had children, but will not have. They're barren for other reasons. They're lacking in mitzvot. Now they're going to be punished because of their distance from God, but they do not have children. The Jewish people, the congregation of Israel, may be like a akara, but they're not lo yalada. They have not had children that are destined for hell, for Gehenna. Kavatayu, like you guys, right? So she stuck it to him. She stuck it to the heretic, and we feel really good about that. Or I do. I don't know about everyone here. And we feel I feel good, right? The heretic was trying to make a problem, comes along Beruria, and explains it in a way that is meant to be in defense of the Jewish people and on offense as a rebuke, as an insult. Right? She calls him Shatya, calls him foolish, stupid one against this heretic. But she didn't just do it again. Beruria didn't, according to the Talmud, Beruria didn't only take this tact and this tone with heretics. She left it with the arch nemesis. If she left it with, Joker and Penguin and all the people that we hate, then that would be fine. But then she has a similar sharpness towards others, who don't seem to be outside the pale, whom we know to be very much part of the tradition and part of the traditional community. Source 7a, the two stories in Eruvin, page 53. One is the story of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili was walking along the way. I'm going to switch to Hebrew because it's hard to figure out exactly what Beruya meant in the English. Amar la be'ezo derech nelech lalod. Rabbi Yossi Aglili just asked Beruya a simple question. Directions. Good for him. He asked for directions. Right? It was before GPS. He needed directions. Beruya knew where to go. Be'ezo derech nelech lalod. So Amar le Lili Shota. She seems to be quick with the word Shota, right? Foolish ones, idiot. Whatever you know. We don't say the S word, stupid. But that's what she's saying, right? Lo kachamru chachamim al tarbe sicha ima isha. Our sages said in Pirkei Avot, don't speak unnecessarily to women, right? Hayal chalomar be'eza lalod. Instead of saying be'ezo derech nelech lalod, instead of saying those 4 words, you could have just said be'ezo lalod. This is a fascinating. You gotta think about what exactly is going on here, right? What exactly is happening in this case? She's saying, you're talking to me. You're not supposed to talk to me so much, right? What tone is that? Is that mocking? Is that literal? It's not a play. So the director's not telling us, how to present the characters here. But I don't know. She's prolonging the conversation, but not just giving directions, right? Well, she's allowed to talk. Well, the counter argument is the Mishnah in Avot never talks about women speaking to men. She can talk to him as much as she wants, but he stuck. He said 4 words. He could have said 2 words. What's going on? Again, it's very hard to overlay emotion on something that's just factual. What we do know is that what we can say is that Beruya is quoting a Mishnah, and Beruya is referring to Rabbi Yossi Aglili as a shota. Right? That's literal, right? That's on the text. Why does she do that? How does she feel about Rabbi Yossi Aglili? How does she feel about that Mishnah in Avot? I don't know. But this perhaps being a little bit too smart for one's own good, or the challenge that insight and knowledge has when you're super genius, but then how do you deal with other people, right? Was this uniquely a challenge for her with men? Was it also with women? Well, we don't have a lot of examples of any Talmudic figure interacting with women, let alone Beruya. So we don't know. We don't know if that's the issue, if that's the particular challenge at hand. But what we do see is that she's familiar with traditional text, and she sort of uses it. She a little bit weaponizes it against Rabbi Yossi Aglili in a way that had she not said that, that would not have been our immediate response, right? Rabbi Yossi Aglili says 4 words to her, right? The rest of the world would not have said, "Oh, he should have said only 2 words to her," right? But that's what she notes, and she responds to it in a somewhat harsh way. Story number 2 in that genre, right? Not just about heretics, but the sharpness that is expressed by Beruya towards others, right? This Beruya came across a certain student who was whispering his studies rather than raising his voice. I go to any Beit Midrash, it's loud. You don't do it quietly, it's loud. But he was very quiet. So in this time, right, Batasha Bey, she kicked him, right? Well, at least she didn't call him idiot. Right, so she gives him a a drasha based on a pasuk in Shmuel, right? If the Torah is ordered in your 248 limbs, then it will be secure, right? But if not, it will not be secure. So in other words, you have to use your voice when you're learning, when you're observing Torah. You do that by learning aloud. You didn't do that. And Rabbi Elazar comes along and had a student. The Talmud says that Rabbi Elazar had a student who studied quietly and forgot his studies after 3 years, right? So Beruria is right. Beruria is correct, right? This time she doesn't call the person is anonymous. We don't know who he is. Student in the Beit Midrash. We don't know anything about him other than he was quiet. Beruria called him out on it. Doesn't call him an idiot, but kicks him, and she's correct. So we see, one of the things that to me emerges is when you have these abilities, when you have like superpowers. Like Beruria has a certain, she's a unique figure in history. Her ability of recall and memorization and knowledge and remembering and applying application is unique among men or women. So how do you relate to people that are not on that level? That to me it's a little harsh here, but if you turn the page to page 3, you see Beruria using this superpower in a kinder way, right? Now let me just move that along. There we go. Here we have the story. 2 stories. Finally, we have Beruria interaction with Rabbi Meir, with her husband. Right. So this, you may be familiar with this. I think about this story every week, every month when we say Barchi Nafshi, because the last line of Barchi Nafshi, the second to last line is Yitamu Chataim Min Haaretz, right, which says let's the sin cease from the land. And so what's the story? There were these hooligans in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood who caused him a great deal of anguish. Rabbi Meir prayed for God to have mercy on them, but they should die. Meir said, I don't want to deal with them anymore. I hope they die. Rabbi Meir's wife, Beruria, right? Beruria Devite, Beruria, or his wife said, the pasuk says, Yitamu Chataim Min Haaretz. Let sin cease from the land, or Shayim Odeinam. And therefore there will be no wicked people. If you understood it as Yitamu Chotim Min Haaretz, let there be no more sinners, then why do you have to repeat that phrase again to say there'll be no wicked people? Of course there's no wicked people. If there are no sinners, it's the same question that the heretic had about Akara lo Yalada. If it means the same thing, why does it have to repeat? So Beruria says that's a problem for you, my dear husband, Rabbi Meir, because you're praying for the death of people. That's incorrect. The pasuk says that sin will cease, and then there will be no more wicked people. You know why? Because once there's no sins, then the wicked people are now righteous. Right? The people are not supposed to be annihilated; just their sins are supposed to be annihilated, and the person is supposed to be transformed into a righteous person, into a tzaddik. Right? So Rabbi Meir instead prayed like his wife told him to, and what happens? They repent. Right? Again, Beruria has a close reading, an accurately correct close reading of a text that she, again, did Rabbi Meir really make this mistake? Was he just upset? Did he really learn that way? I don't know. All I know is that Beruria interjects and says, wait a second, this is not, we have a teaching that tells us otherwise. You don't pray for the death of wicked people, you pray that they should repent. Again, you can have a whole shiur on whether this is absolute, right? Is it always the case? But she felt that it's applicable in this case at the very least. And so therefore, and again, is Beruria right or wrong? She's right. And Rabbi Meir follows her way. Medrash and Mishlei. Mishlei has Eshet Chayil Miyimtza. So we saw Beruria using her erudition, her knowledge, her vast. Well, it's her psychology, but utilizing the traditional text, right? In other words, she's using Yitamu Chataim Min Haaretz or Shayim Odeinam and saying, how do you understand that? But again, is this the same Beruria that used it, seemingly weaponizes it a little bit more in the previous example, right? A guy, so she's nicer to him, right? So she's nicer to him. Okay. Right. Right. So she's nicer to her. She holds back a little bit on that. She doesn't call him an idiot and she doesn't kick him. Okay. That for sure we could say. That we know. It doesn't tell us that she kicked him, and it doesn't tell us that she, what was that? She had respect. Right. I mean, you want, like Rabbi Yosef Lili, I think he was maybe there was some beef. Right. I mean, as far as we know, Rabbi Yosef Lili was not a slouch. He was up there. He gets quoted a lot. But I mean, it's true. This is her husband. She seems to take a slightly different tact. And the last example of this is also a very famous story. It's very long, so we're not going to read it completely inside, but you may be familiar with it. It's where another tragedy, right? We know that Bruria's brother died and her father died. Story goes, according to the Medrash and Mishlei, that Bruria's two sons died as well on the same day, and on Shabbos. And Rabbi Meir was in the Beis Medrash teaching, and he came home and he asked where his sons were. And Bruria said, first let's make Havdalah. They were at the Beis Medrash. And Rabbi Meir says, well, if they were there, I would have seen that. Let's make Havdalah first. She makes Havdalah. Says, let's eat something. So we eat something. Then she says, let me ask you a question. And remember, Bruria is like the smartest one in the room always. She asks Rabbi Meir a rather simple question. If someone gave me a deposit and then they ask for it back, do I have to give it back? Right? That should have set off all types of warning bells for Rabbi Meir. Buria's the smartest woman in the room, smartest person in the room every time. She's asking the simplest question in the world. Someone gives me a deposit and then asks me for the deposit back. I'm a shomer chinam, right? I'm not getting paid for it. It's theirs. They ask, I take it, I hold on to it, and then they ask for me back. Do I have to give it back? My mother says, of course. And she shows them bodies of her two sons and says, God has entrusted us with these children. He's asked for them back, and that's it. And that's the way she broke the news. That's the way she broke the news to her husband. And then Rabbi Meir says, Hashem Natan, Hashem Lakach, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken. In God's name be blessed. And Rabbi Chanina, right? That's her father. Very well could be her father. With this thing, just the last line, with this thing, she consoled him and his mind became composed. Right? Eshet Chayil Miyimsa. This is the valor. Someone wanted to suggest, I didn't see this anywhere, that Bruria could be similar to Valeria, which is valor, right? In Latin. I'm not sure because most people understand Bruria as related to Baror Yah, chosen by God. But I guess if it's not Hebrew, then you have a little bit more of a latitude to suggest that perhaps it's related to a Latin phrase. So that's what we know about. That's what we know about Bruria. The last story exacerbates the tragedy that her life experienced, but also speaks of a certain sensitivity, right? A certain kindness that she showed. Granted, in the two examples we have, it's towards her husband. The other examples are not towards that, but it is once again a utilization of the tradition and of the texts in a way that only an insider, only someone who was very well versed in the text would have been able to do so. There's one other instance. With this, we'll wrap up in the next couple of minutes. There's one other story also in Avodah Zarah. I mentioned we saw on page 2, we saw on page 2, the top, source number 5, part of the tragedy of the story about Rabbi Chanina ben Trajo, right, was Bruria's father, and he was martyred. So Avodah Zarah also tells another story about Bruria's family, Her brother was killed by bandits. Her father was martyred by the Romans. So she had a sister that was taken captive by the Romans and placed in a brothel. That's how the story goes. And the story goes that it's a long story, but here are the highlights. Maria asks her husband to go and save her sister. Rabbi Meir goes, but in order to save his sister, he has to put himself in some compromising situations that either actually were compromised or had what we call maratayan, right? It looked like he was in a compromised situation, perhaps looked like he was tasting non-kosher food, what other, to hide the fact that he was Rabbi Meir, they were chasing him, whatever the case was. The end of the story is that the sister is saved, but Rabbi Meir has to flee, right? And so without giving the punchline, we can understand why Rabbi Meir has to flee. Rabbi Meir has to flee because he entered enemy territory, saved a woman that had been captured, and left. But that's not what the Gemara answered. The end of the Gemara is, the end of page 3, come Arak Ata Bavel. The end of the story is that Rabbi Meir has to flee to Bavel. He had been in Israel and he had to flee to Bavel. Why? Igadamri mehai maisa, v'igadamri memaisa de Bruria. There's some reason that's not specified. Either it has to do with the story that we just read about Rabbi Meir, or it has to do with a story about Bruria. And the question that everyone asks is, the story about Rabbi Meir, we can figure out. It's either the fact that he disobeyed the Romans, or the fact that he had this incredible story that involved compromised situations, right? He didn't do anything wrong. People thought he did something wrong. So what do? You start a new life. You go to Bavel. Nobody knew the story. Nobody heard of the story. You can start fresh. That would be great. That's the Maisa. That's Mehai Maisa. What does it mean, Maisa de Bruria? And here, you turn to page 4, there's a Rashi that our Gemaras have that says as follows. Rashi says, "V'ikadamri mishum Maisa de Bruria. Shepam achat liglaga al shamru chachamim nashin datan kalate." There's a Gemara Kedushin when it talks about seclusion, right? Yichud rules. That says that men and women have to be careful. Women have to be careful, especially nashin datan kalot. What exactly does that mean? Women are more susceptible. They're easier to be convinced, and therefore the rules of yichud are especially important. So the story goes that Rashi quotes is that she criticized those rules. She questioned those rules. Bruria questioned whether nashin datan kalot is appropriate, is true, right? V'amar la. Rabbi Meir said, "Chayech sofech lahodot l'divreihem." So Rameir was, according to Rashi, Rameir says, you'll come to realize the veracity of this statement of the rabbis. So what Rashi says, the story, according to Rashi, Rameir sent a student of his to seduce his wife. And he was persistent for a number of days, until ultimately he was successful. When it became known that this was all a ploy to show that she was wrong about her outrage about the statement of Nashin Datan Kalot, Chanka Atzma, right? She killed her, hung herself. And Rameir had to leave because of the shame that came about as a result of doing this. It's a crazy story. The bat mitzvah class did not make it to the bat mitzvah class. Crazy story. How do we understand it? Where does it come from? The idea that she might have questions about a statement that didn't apply to her, that's plausible from what we've presented tonight. The idea that her husband would set her up to end up being in a compromised situation, to sin, to then ultimately feel so bad as to take her own life. Is that plausible? So what's interesting is that it's there are a number of opinions feel. First of all, there's no mention of this until Rashi. No other source for this story. We have a lot of stories about Beruria. We have no story about this Maaseh of Beruria. The only one that mentions it is Rashi. Rashi is 900 years after Beruria lived, right? And no other Gaonim, no one before Rashi makes this statement, which leads a number of traditional Orthodox scholars to suggest that it's a scribal error, that it was a student of Rashi who inserted it into a manuscript of Rashi that ultimately became somewhat generalized and somewhat accepted as the text that we use. Is that apologetics, or is that like the only way to understand it, right? Just because it got written down. First of all, you have to understand, when there were, back in the day, before there was a printing press, before there was a computer, and you got to just backspace, right? Oftentimes you wouldn't erase, you would just add marginal notes, right? Could this have been a note added by a student of Rashi? Where would he get this amazing story? So again, I'll leave it to you. Is this apologetics, or is this taking all we know about Beruria, about Rabbi Meir, and trying to utilizing all of the possibilities that are in our toolbox to suggest something? And in a moment, we'll give with the last 5 minutes or so, we'll give two approaches as to how you come to it. Thanks, you.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, this is a terrible story, but it really gets me of another story in the Gemara where people were so into the letter of the law that they really neglected Adam Avinu.
Right.
Plus, which is the story of how the Kohanim, there was one avoda in the.
They all run up to get to. They all right.
Decided that, the Kohanim could earn this one avoda.
Just by running.
Ran up the ramp and made it up to the top first. And terribly, one time, these Kohanim stabbed one another.
Right.
Because it doesn't actually kill another Kohan.
Right.
And then they said, the rabbi said, this will never happen again. We'll reinstate the race. And it happened again another time. People were so into the letter of the law and
right.
And I can imagine that they see Luria and her husband were both coming to Kohanim, but they were so into the letter of the law that they could do terrible things to prove their point.
Right. Okay. Could be. Right. Okay. Again, it is Rashi. If you open up a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, you'll see that Rashi on it, but you won't see anything earlier. You won't see any source earlier to this story, which raises a lot of questions. Rav Eitam Hankin, Rabbanit Chana Hankin's son, who was murdered in 2015 on Chol HaMoed Sukkot. He was 31 years old. He and his wife were murdered by Arab terrorists in front of their 4 children in a car attack, drive-by shooting. So when he died at 31 years old, he had already written 3 books and 50 scholarly articles, and one of them is on this topic about Beruria, the Maaseh of Beruria. And he has a very interesting thought. He feels that Rashi never wrote this, and this was a student who interjected it and confused it with a different story that's found in Rashi. It's a Gemara in Psachim. It's not so important the details of the story, but one of the statements that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi made right before he died was, "Do not sit on the bed of an Aramean woman." And the question is, why not to sit on the bed of an Aramean woman, right? It's due to one possibility is that it's due to a concern of Maaseh of Papa. What's the Maaseh of Rav Papa? So Rashi says this is the story. This is nothing to do with Beruria, other than there's this cryptic statement about an event that occurred, and we're told that the event occurred due to a story that involved Talmudic figures that we're familiar with, but the details of the story are not told anywhere else, right? So Rabbi Meir ran away from Israel to Bavel, possibly because of Maaseh de Beruria. What's Maaseh de Beruria? We don't know. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi told people be careful about going into sitting on an Aramean woman's bed or an Aramean's bed. Why? Ma'aseh Rav Papa. We know who Rav Papa is. We don't know anything about the story. What's the story of Ma'aseh Rav Papa? So Rashi quotes it as follows. Source 11b on page 4. Shaita Aramit Achat. He tells it that it was a story about an Aramean woman. Right, first of all, there's nothing in the story in what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that okay. Shaita Aramit Achat Chayevet Lo Ma'ot. There was an Aramean woman who owed Rav Papa money. And he went every day to try to collect. He'd collect a little bit. She'd tell her to come back. He'd come every day, over and over again. Yom Echad, one day, Chanka et Bena, Benatano al Hamita. She killed her son, her baby. She strangled him, put him into the bed. Her papa, Amrlo Shev ad Shavi Motecha. She invited him and said, sit on the bed. Right? There's a blood libel. There's a blood libel, right? The way Rashi describes it. And the Aramean woman wanted to get out of paying, so she strangled her child, and she blamed the murder on her papa. Her papa had to flee. This story, Rav Haken points out, is mentioned in 4 other Gaonim and Rishonim, but there are 4 unique factors in the telling of the Ma'aseh Rav Papa that Rashi brings down that's not found in any of the other 4. And let me tell you very quickly. In the other stories, there's no mention of the borrower being an Aramean woman. In the other cases, it was a man. The other Rishonim, the other commentators who explain the story of Rav Papa don't mention anything about it being a woman. Number 2, in the story that Rashi quotes, Rav Papa would visit this woman over and over again. Right? It wasn't just a one-shot deal. She would come many days in a row. And that's not found in any of the other tellings of the story of Ma'aseh Rav Papa. Number 3 is where the woman strangles her son. In the other depictions of the story, it just talks about a dead child. It doesn't say anything about the woman strangling anyone herself with her own hands. Number 4, the end of the story where Rav Papa has to flee, that piece is not found in any other depiction of the story of Rav Papa. All it goes is that he was put in a difficult situation. He was asked to pay a fine. He was in a lot of hot water. It doesn't say anything about fleeing. So these are 4 pieces of the story of Ma'aseh Rav Papa, right, that are unique to Rashi, right? That it's a woman, that the man would visit often, right? That the woman strangles someone, and that ultimately the rabbi has to flee. All those 4 pieces are the basic structure of the story that we have, according to Rashi, of the Ma'aseh of Beruria, right? Which led Rav Haken to say it was a conjecture. It was a student that took a explanation that Rashi had on this Ma'aseh Rav Papa and had the same phrase of a warning due to a Ma'aseh of someone. And the Ma'aseh of Beruria ended up being that. Now, might that student, if we're going to take it as that this is an error, that the Ma'aseh of Beruria is, as we'll see in a moment, Rav Elyashiv gives a different explanation of what Ma'aseh of Beruria is, but it's not that there was that husband and wife that a husband did this to his wife. Why might a student make this? Was this an attempt to knock Beruria down a little bit, right? That she erred in her understanding of the veracity of the statement Nashim Datim Kalot, and ends up backfiring on her majorly. Is that why? I don't know. But the idea that this explanation of Ma'aseh Beruria is very sordid, very unfortunate, very terrible explanation of Ma'aseh Beruria should not be attributed to Rashi. Not only Rav Haken makes that point, Rav Yitam Haken, Zichrono Livracha, but also Rav Elyashiv. So let me just, the last source, Rav Yaakov Ades, there's much more written about things that people heard from Rav Elyashiv than what Rav Elyashiv wrote himself. So this is Rav Yaakov Ades. We'll finish with this on something that it's a Sefer Divrei Yaakov, which has interactions that Rav Ades had with Rav Elyashiv. I'm not gonna read it in Hebrew. I'm just gonna translate it as I go along. So he was talking about how do you understand when biblical or Talmudic figures are depicted in a negative light? Not easy. We don't. On the one hand, we don't sweep it under the rug. On the other hand, we don't celebrate it. Right? You need to have a balance there. So he says, along those lines, right? As I was telling a lot of stories, he remembers a specific instance in winter 1994. Tafshin and Dalid. He was with Rav Elyashiv in his house, and they started talking about the praise that Rav Elyashiv gave to Beruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir. Bet says, I said to Rav Elyashiv, the end of Beruria was a Ma'aseh lo tov. Something not so nice happened to Beruria at the end of her life, as explained by Rashi in Avodah Zarah, Daf Yud Chet. Right? Immediately, right? Rav Elyashiv said, "Shahamaisa hazel lo hayav lo nivra." This never happened. Story as depicted, right? And Rav Elyashiv is not a modernist, right? He's not an apologist. He says the story as depicted in Rashi could have never happened, right? And he said this, Omar Ravazeh ben Yachrotzo Tuva. He said this very emphatically, right? In a very animated way. So then the question obviously is, what about Rashi? What do you do with those words, right? So Masha Omer b'Gemara Mishum Ma'aseh Beruria, with this blend, Tzarach Lomar L'derech Zeh Sha'akavana L'Ma'aseh Acher She'enenu Yodi Mahu. It's referring to a story about Beruria that's not recorded in the Talmud per se, right? The depictions that we have in the Talmud and Talmudic material is not everything that happened to these people. Ma'aseh Beruria is not depicted not written down in the Talmud black on white. Vaya mistama, Rav Elyashiv assumed Ma'aseh shel tzitkut, gamor, raksha shel tonat armar mitnagdu l'kela ma'aseh. It had something to do with the Roman efforts, the Roman antagonists who were always bothering Beruria's family, whether it's Beruria's father or Beruria's husband, and that's the Ma'aseh de Beruria. So why did Rabbi Meir have to run? Why did Beruria have to leave? Right? Nowhere in the Gemara does it say Beruria killed herself. Nowhere does it say that when Rabbi Meir ran away, he ran without Beruria. No, the Ma'aseh de Beruria is within the context of the stories that we know about, that the Romans were pursuing, that the Romans were persecuting, that the Romans were antagonistic, and as a result, right? So Rameir and right, I'm sure Beruria, was not necessarily the best person to be in proximity to people who are looking to get the Jews. So they left. They went to Bavel, where the Romans were not so exacting on the Jews. So there's a lot of intrigue. Beruria is a fascinating character, a complicated character, a very real character, very human. The Ma'aseh de Beruria, as Rashi's interpretation, is out there. It's worth noting that great rabbis within our camp suggest that it's an interjection that's not part of the tradition, that's not part of the Besorah, and give examples of that. But it does. But even the information that we do have, parts of the story that's quoted in the name of Rashi are plausible, right? That she's having this confrontation about a statement of the Gemara that she doesn't feel applies to her, and how does she navigate that? So that's plausible. The rest of the story not so plausible. And this will end, and then we'll take questions. The best proof that the rest of the story is not plausible. That ultimately Beruria is viewed as a model of what you do when you're superhuman, when you have great intellectual capacity, that you can hang out, quote unquote, with the big boys. And sometimes it's difficult to have the right tone and tenor and tact when you're that smart. But ultimately, whatever shortcomings Beruria might have had, there's a tradition that's written that rabbis are encourage the use of the name Beruria for our Jewish children. There's a school in Elizabeth, New Jersey, named after Beruria, and Beruria is one of those. Right? We don't name Jewish children Korach, because that's not a nice Jewish name. But Beruria is a nice Jewish name. And in some ways, that's the best proof that whatever flaws she may have had, ultimately Bruri stands up as a Jewish heroine and as somebody that has a lot to teach us and to emulate from. Yeah, there was a question.
Yeah, so Rabbi Yashiv says that Lo Hayavu on Mikra, he doesn't deal with the fact that Rashi quotes this story. Just dismisses Rashi without explaining why.
Right. He just says it can't be. That's what it is. He says that contextually it's just impossible. It just can't be. Right. Right. Okay. Yes.
Use that human. It's just to teach us that she's human, and anything that she did and anything